It was long past midnight when the CEO found himself pacing the silent halls of his skyscraper office, weighed down by the failure of yet another strategy meeting. The $200 million problem looming over the company had swallowed months of time, endless brainstorming sessions, and millions in consulting fees, yet no one could crack it. His mind was foggy, his tie loosened, his steps heavy as he considered whether the empire he had built might finally crumble. As he pushed open the door to the strategy room, expecting only silence, he froze. There, beneath the harsh glow of fluorescent lights, stood Maria, the maid who quietly swept the offices each night. But she wasn't holding a mop. She was standing before the whiteboard, marker in hand, her brow furrowed in fierce concentration. Equations, diagrams, and notes spilled across the board, not random scribbles but intricate, precise solutions that mirrored the very problems his top engineers had failed to untangle. The CEO watched, breath caught in his throat, as she moved swiftly, her hands dancing with certainty, as though the solution had been waiting for her all along. In a matter of seconds, she completed what his brightest minds could not. The silence of the room deepened, broken only by the faint squeak of the marker. He stood rooted to the spot, stunned, his exhaustion forgotten. Maria, the woman he had walked past 100 times without notice, had just cracked the problem that threatened the future of his company. The sound of his footsteps startled her. Maria spun around, the marker slipping from her hand, her eyes wide with fear as if she'd been caught committing a crime. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of the silence pressing between them. She glanced at the floor, her shoulders tightening, and whispered, "I'm sorry, sir. I shouldn't be here. I was just curious." Her voice trembled, braced for anger, dismissal, maybe even the loss of the only job she had. But instead of scolding, the CEO took a step closer, his expression softened by awe rather than fury. He looked at the board, then back at her, and asked quietly, almost in disbelief, How did you do that?" Maria hesitated, her eyes darting to the door as if seeking escape. Finally, she confessed in a low voice, "I used to study mathematics. I loved it more than anything. But when my father got sick and my family needed money, I had to drop out. Cleaning offices was the only work I could find." She pressed her palms together nervously, as if shrinking under the weight of her own admission. "Sometimes, when I see the equations left on the boards, I can't help myself. I just try." The CEO felt his chest tighten, not with judgment but with something else, shame. He had assumed she was invisible, just part of the background of his empire. And now, in front of him, stood a mind that might have been overlooked forever. The CEO stood frozen, staring at Maria as her words sank deeper with every passing second. A maid, the woman who quietly emptied trash bins and polished floors while executives debated billion-dollar strategies, had just revealed a brilliance that his entire company had failed to harness. He felt a pang of guilt sharp enough to take his breath away. How many times had he walked by her without so much as a nod? How many chances had the world taken from her simply because life demanded survival instead of dreams? His gaze shifted to the whiteboard, filled with her neat, confident solutions. The symbols that had tormented his teams for months looked suddenly elegant, almost effortless under her hand. He thought of the endless resumes piled on his desk, the pedigrees of Ivy League graduates who couldn't see what she had seen in seconds. And here she was, wearing worn shoes and carrying a bucket, her genius hidden in plain sight. In that moment, something shifted inside him. Success, he realized, wasn't only about hiring the most polished candidates or boasting the flashiest credentials. It was about seeing people, really seeing them, beyond titles and uniforms, beyond the roles society had forced them into. For the first time, he didn't see Maria as the maid. He saw her as someone with a mind capable of changing the future. And as the realization sank in, so did a quiet but unshakable truth: talent had no boundaries, only barriers. And he was standing face to face with one broken. The next morning, the CEO made a decision that startled even himself. Instead of quietly thanking Maria and moving on, he called an emergency company-wide meeting. The entire staff gathered, murmuring with confusion, expecting grim updates about the crisis. But when the CEO walked in, he wasn't alone. At his side was Maria, still in her modest uniform, clutching her hands nervously, unsure why she was there. The CEO stepped to the front, his voice steady but charged with conviction. "Last night," he began, "I witnessed something extraordinary. A problem that has drained this company for months was solved in minutes, by someone none of us expected." He gestured toward Maria, who flushed with embarrassment, trying to shrink into herself. Gasps rippled across the room, a few incredulous whispers rising, "The maid?" But the CEO pressed on. "Maria is not just the woman who cleans our floors. She is a brilliant mind who has given us a gift, one we didn't even know we had in our midst. From today forward, she will no longer be working in the shadows. She will join us as a problem solver, as part of our team, with full support to pursue the education she once had to give up." For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then, slowly at first, applause filled the air, growing louder until it thundered. Maria's eyes shimmered with tears as colleagues she once passed unnoticed now stood to honor her. In that moment, her life, and the spirit of the company, was transformed. Months passed, and the change was undeniable. What began as disbelief had blossomed into admiration. Maria, once invisible in the corners of the office, now stood at the center of innovation meetings, her insights not only saving the company but pushing it to new heights of success. Projects that had once stalled were now breaking ground, guided by her sharp intuition and quiet brilliance. Yet what inspired people most wasn't just her genius, it was her humility. She never boasted, never carried resentment for the years she had been overlooked. Instead, she poured herself into lifting others, encouraging young interns, listening to ideas from even the shyest voices in the room. One afternoon, at the company's annual gathering, the CEO took the stage beside her. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything that had changed. Sometimes the greatest talent isn't hidden in resumes or job titles. Sometimes it's standing right beside us, waiting to be seen. He turned toward Maria, and the crowd rose to their feet, the applause carrying an emotion that went beyond celebration. It was respect, gratitude, hope. Maria blinked back tears as she looked out at her colleagues, no longer just a maid, no longer invisible. She had become a reminder that brilliance can be found in the most unexpected places, and that kindness and belief in another person's worth can alter the course of not just a company, but lives. And as the applause thundered on, she smiled, finally seen, finally free.